Hey guys, I'm your own Emmanuel Javed and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And as I've already promised with you guys that I'll be making a web series which will be free of cost for everyone. And the web series will be on the science of psychology. And today is the first episode of my web series, which is not mine, but it's yours technically. So the name of the web series is Science of Psychology. And the first guest, which I have on the web series, is Professor Avi Adhikari. So, hi, Professor. How are you?
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
No worries, Professor. And guys, let me share with you some achievements of Professor. Professor has Ph.D. from Columbia University, and he has done post-doctoral research at Stanford University for 5 years. And his research is based on neuroscience. So, the topic of our this first episode will be fear, anxiety, and how people get into it and how can we get out of this trap. So this will be the first episode of my YouTube channel and the web series. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, guys, please do like, subscribe, and share to my YouTube channel, because if you do it, it will be encouraging from me. And do leave comments after listening to this interview, because this interview is going to change your life forever. And I bet it. And in the description, I'll be putting some research work of Professor, because Professor is currently working at UCLA, and he has done a mind-boggling work. Like, he's done a phenomenal research work. So again, welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the most animated introduction ever had.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much. So, Professor, like, starting with the very first question, which I had in my mind is, how do you define fear? How do you define fear in terms of psychology? Like, what psychology says about fear?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because there are a few related words like fear, anxiety, and panic. And in everyday language, we might use them synonymously, but in neuroscience research, they have very separate meanings. So one way of thinking about it is that they are the names of the reactions that happen at different intensities of threat exposure. So for example, if you are exposed to some very low potential threat, then, or you're just anticipating some potential threat in the future, the reaction to that is often called anxiety. So one example of that might be something like you're walking around in a neighborhood that you read is very dangerous, and some other people got stabbed there recently. So you're thinking maybe something will happen, who knows? But there's nothing happening at this moment, but you still feel more vigilant, and you have some symptoms like your heart rate increases a little, you get more aware of what's happening. And then fear is the reaction to more nearby threat that is actually happening, something of medium intensity. So maybe something like there's some shooting going on in front of you, which are two other people, and they're not shooting at you, but still very, very dangerous. And lastly, panic would be the reaction to something extremely dangerous, like the maximum intensity of danger that's potentially life-threatening, like someone shooting at you would cause you to panic. Or if you're asphyxiating because you can't breathe, that could also cause panic in people. And these different reactions are controlled by different brain regions, and they also produce different effects. So for example, one reaction to the panic of suffocation is this gasping for air or trying to escape very fast. And that reaction, as you see, is different from the reactions you'd get in the situation of having anxiety, which could be caused by even by something from in the future, like maybe next week I will lose my job because my performance is not going well. So the reactions you'd have to deal with that threat are different from the reaction you'd have to someone shooting at you or asphyxiating. And again, and not surprisingly, those are controlled by different brain regions. So that's what I would say is the difference between those terms.
So, like Professor, sometimes when we are sitting, like just sitting, or sometimes when we are doing any work, a certain thought strikes our mind. Some things like something which is like a kind of fantasy, that whether this will happen or not, like you don't know if it is going to happen or it is nowhere near truth. And sometimes those things strike in our mind, and ultimately when they strike in our mind, it completely, like, we feel bad in our heart, and like sometimes the heartbeat starts like increasing, heart starts palpitating. So how do you define that thing? What is happening in our body at that time? Like, what is it basically? How to deal with that thing?
Yeah, so we are able to simulate a lot of things in our head, like you said. Not just that, but also maybe nice things as well. But and we often get the bodily reactions that we would have if that thing actually happened. So someone that, for example, is traumatized because something very bad, dangerous happened to them in the past, they will get these reactions you said, like increases in heart rate and respiration, and increases in stress hormones in their blood, if they just think mentally about that trauma, or if they even see something that's not dangerous but maybe reminds them of that situation. So, and the reactions are very similar to what would happen with the real threat exposure in terms of both the kind of circuits that are activated in the brain and symptoms you could measure.
So, Professor, like, how do you compare, like, as like we were already talking, like, when I asked that, do you think like fear, if fear is prolonged, it can deal to anxiety? So, how do you consider this sentence? Like, do you think it is correct, or do you think like if fear is not prolonged, it will lead to something else, and then that thing will lead to anxiety? Like, how does our fear leads us to anxiety?
Well, fear doesn't have to lead to anxiety, but it may. So for one thing, it's just somewhat unusual for fear to be very prolonged, because it's kind of the reaction to a very acute threat that's there at this moment. And typically, people are not under threat for many hours continuously. But sometimes that can happen. Say if you are in a location that is in an active war zone, so there's just bullets flying around everywhere and explosions happening. So in situations like that, you could have somewhat of a more prolonged fear. And then if you have a traumatic event of that magnitude, you can often have these negative states, even if you're in a safe, nice location where there is no explosion happening, just because now you will reminisce about that event and think about it, and you'll be more reactive to small little things in the environment that maybe other people that aren't traumatized wouldn't be. So one common thing that happens is that loud noises are indicative of very high level danger in these war zones, right? Because it's usually an explosion or a gunshot or something very dangerous. But like a loud noise at UCLA is usually not something super dangerous. But if you have spent some long time in a war zone, then when you're back in some other place where it's safer, just listening to something that's evocative of that place, like a loud noise, can make you have these very intense reactions, like palpitations and changes in stress hormones and so on.
So, Professor, like one of the most important questions, like it has been my favorite question as well when I was planning the questions. How can a person get out of his fears? How can a person get out of his fear? Like if he has a phobia of something, because obviously, like there's like specific phobia of some certain things, some specific fears. So, how can a person get out of that fear?
Yeah, that's a very difficult process, but one very common way of dealing that with is with exposure therapy. So something like, let's say people are afraid of spiders. Then in the therapist's office, they are exposed to spiders in a controlled and voluntary fashion, meaning they first maybe see a photo of a spider in a book, then they have that experience and learn how to deal with that. Then maybe they watch videos of spiders, which is some more realistic than a photo, so potentially more threatening, and then the person learns how to be okay with that exposure. Then something like looking at a live spider contained in an aquarium at a distance. So you just gradually over sessions get more voluntarily exposed to the threat until you learn that it's not as dangerous as you thought before. Because there's also some learning that happens because, let's say, when you're looking at the spider, then you're very scared, but then you have this experience of, I'm doing this, but nothing catastrophic happened, so your brain learns that new information. So now it was ideally slightly less hyperreactive to spiders. And that applies to other specific phobias that are not spiders as well. It could be anything else. Some people are afraid of going inside elevators or heights and so on. So that has success, but it has a common problem, which is that often what the person learns is that spiders are not dangerous in this setting of being in this therapist's office with this person, and then when they see the spider in their house, then they still might have a big reaction to that. But some of that learning does transfer to other situations, but that is the main problem with this kind of exposure therapy, which is often the learning is very specific to that therapeutic setting, which is not very useful, because what you want is for the person to not be afraid of spiders in general, rather than not being afraid of spiders in the therapist's office with this specific therapist right there. So that's one common way of treating. And there are also medications for anxiety disorders. But one thing that's not very discussed is that often these symptoms are not really diseases, but they're sort of reactions to very bad life circumstances, right? So if you have lots of big family problems and you don't have a strong social support network and you're addicted to drugs and you're unemployed and some other bad thing happened, then it's not surprising that you'd be, say, more anxious than the average person and develop depression. But that's more of, I would say, a reaction to very difficult life conditions, and in that case, the trying to solve the underlying causes is very important as well.
Got it. So, like, if we have a fear of something, we should face that thing instead of just fighting with that thought and leading ourselves to the stress and depression, right?
Yeah, it should. That, which is a very counterintuitive thing to do, because the strength in these sorts of fear overcoming processes doesn't come from avoiding the threat or through protection from being by being safe, but rather it comes from voluntary controlled exposure to that situation that causes the discomfort or fear. So the growth actually comes, like you said, from this exposure to the threat, not from retreating and protection and safety.
Got it. And Professor, like, sometimes, like, another important question, like, sometimes we have like the thoughts and we fight with those thoughts, and those thoughts lead us to anxiety. So how can we control that thing? How can we control that thing? Or if we get into that thing, how can we get out of that particular thing?
Mm-hmm. That's a very good question of importance to mental health. And there are several things one can do. So first, there are known life habits that have been shown to decrease this sort of mindset. So for example, doing active exercise regularly has been shown to have all sorts of mental health benefits, and also other benefits for immune system. Also, like everything, exercise is very important for health of everything, including mental health. So that, also having a strong social support network is very protective against developing pathological reactions to traumatic events. And there are also habits like mindful meditation, which have been shown also to be very helpful in decreasing these symptoms. And if you are already in the moment where something is happening, there are approaches related to cognitive behavioral therapy that you could learn with the therapist and try to apply to yourself, which are kind of trying to not catastrophize the situation. So people often in their internal dialogue say something like, "Oh, this is the worst thing ever," and then they react to that as if it were. But then if you stop and think about it, is this the worst thing ever? And often if you kind of analyze the thinking in this more explicit, directed way, you can see that no, it's actually not that bad because there's this and that. And so that's another approach. Then you can also change your breathing patterns. Like if you relax and try to breathe more slowly and pay attention to your breath, it's also related to the mindfulness approach. That will also decrease your reactions to these situations. So there's a variety of things that could be done. And there's also, of course, the pharmacological therapies, with drugs prescribed by psychiatrists.
Got it. So like, so you're trying to say that what we can do is that we can stop whenever we get that kind of thought, we can stop and question ourselves that, is this the worst thing which is happening to us? Or like, is this the worst thing which till the moment has happened to us? Like we're trying to, like, we should question ourselves that, is this something the most worst that has happened to ourselves, right?
No, it's not necessarily questioning if this is the worst. What I meant is, as an example, say if the person is thinking this is the worst thing, then the person should analyze that thought. But maybe they're thinking something else, like this spider is extremely dangerous, but then if you analyze that reaction more slowly, you'll see, but this is just a movie of a spider on a TV. There's not even a real spider, so in reality it is not dangerous. So you can also depends on what the thought process is. It's not that it's always necessarily that.
Got it. So thank you so much, Professor. It is done.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you so much. No, it is my pleasure and it is my honor to like discuss with you some of the most important issues of our society. And technically, not only our society, like whole world is going through these things, because we are facing, like, it is COVID going on, and we are facing like these things almost on daily basis. So thank you so much, Professor. And guys, if you have any question, please do mention in comment, and do tell how do you feel after like getting after like watching this interview, after listening to some of the best and the phenomenal advisors, and one of the best way of technically talking about things, and like talking about things in a systematic way. So thank you so much, Professor, and God bless you. And thank you so much. And yeah, so guys, do like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Plus, secondly, again, I'm saying, do leave in comments, how do you feel after listening to the interview? So see ya till the next episode, and God bless you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.